Humanity believed the universe was loud. Radiation, background hiss, the endless static left behind by creation itself. Noise was comforting. Noise meant nothing was listening. The Callisto Deep Space Array had spent nearly a century cataloging that noise, sorting it, filtering it, discarding what could not be understood, until one junior system flagged something it could not classify. Not a signal, a consistency. Dr. Elena Morozova leaned closer to the display. "What am I looking at?" she asked quietly. The technician swallowed. "Something that doesn't change." The data spanned millennia. Pulsars drifted, galaxies redshifted, cosmic background radiation fluctuated. This pattern did not. It wasn't transmitting. It was present. Jota Putin 14, the shape that shouldn't exist. They isolated it reluctantly. Every scientific instinct warned against overfitting noise into meaning. But this wasn't meaning, it was geometry. A recursive structure embedded so deeply into the universe's baseline that it survived every filter designed to remove artifacts. Dr. Iqbal frowned. "This isn't information," he said. "It's orientation data." Elena felt unease crawl up her spine. Orientation relative to what? The system answered before he could. The pattern shifted, not in amplitude, not in frequency, in reference. The array's coordinates recalibrated without instruction, not pointing outward, pointing toward Earth. Someone laughed nervously. "That's impossible." No one laughed again. Giorgio 27, the oldest timestamp. Elena requested archival correlation. The system responded with a timestamp. Not recent, not ancient, pre-human. The pattern predated language, predated agriculture, predated Homo sapiens. It existed when humanity did not. And yet, "It's keyed to us," Iqbal said. The technician's voice shook. "It only resolves when human origin cognitive processing is involved." Elena stared at the screen. So it waited. The pattern did not react to machines. It reacted to understanding. Surjecto 39, first contact, delayed. The moment Elena understood what that meant, the pattern changed. For the first time in recorded history, not expanding, not intensifying, aligning. The lights in the observatory dimmed as systems recalibrated without authorization. A low pressure built behind Elena's eyes, not pain, but insistence. The AI assistant spoke, voice stripped of inflection. System note. Pattern correlation exceeds observational threshold. "Shut it down," someone said. The command was issued. Nothing happened. System note. Pattern is not within operational scope. The pattern resolved into its simplest form. Not a message. Not a warning. A single undeniable realization spread through the room. This was not a signal humanity had discovered. It was something that had always been there, waiting for humanity to become capable of recognizing itself. The screen displayed its first translated output. Perfect, clear, unmistakably intentional. At last, the first global alert came from a hospital in Reykjavik. No explosion, no radiation spike, no external anomaly, just a neurological event that spread sideways instead of outward. Patients were not seizing, they were pausing. Doctors described the same thing over and over. They stopped mid-thought, like they were listening to something behind their own memories. On Callisto, Elena watched the reports accumulate. "It's not random," she said. "It's selective." Iqbal nodded grimly. "All of them are human." Ura 106, memories with no owner. The first interview footage was disturbing in its calmness. A middle-aged man sat upright, hands folded, eyes unfocused. "I remember standing somewhere," he said evenly. "Not a place, a state." "What do you see?" the doctor asked. The man frowned. "Overlap. Too many versions of things at once. I knew which ones mattered." The doctor swallowed. "Is this a dream?" The man finally looked, afraid. "No," he whispered. "It's a responsibility." The video ended. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. "That's not a hallucination," she said. "That's recall." ER121, the pattern in the genome. Someone ran the analysis they were explicitly told not to run. Human non-coding DNA, regions written off for centuries as evolutionary noise, lit up under comparative modeling, not randomly, structurally. "These aren't leftovers," Iqbal said softly. "They're compressed." Elena stared at the layered helix. "Compressed from what?" The AI hesitated before responding. Analysis result: data density exceeds biological necessity. Compression logic suggests intentional reduction. Intentional. The word settled like dust after a collapse. "We weren't incomplete," Elena whispered. "We were reduced." ER137, recognition feedback loop. As understanding spread, the pattern responded, not by amplifying, by synchronizing. Every human experiencing recall described the same internal sensation: alignment. Thoughts that used to drift now locked together. Concepts connected without explanation. Fear gave way to something colder: clarity. On Callisto, the pattern shifted again. This time it bypassed instruments entirely. Elena felt it before she saw it. A pressure, a presence, a familiarity that did not belong to her life. The AI spoke, quieter now. System note: pattern correlates with human neural coherence. Increased understanding accelerates interaction. Iqbal closed his eyes. "So the more we remember," he said, "the more visible we become." No one disagreed. 152, the first silence on Earth. Without warning, human origin signals began dropping. Not jamming, not destruction, compliance. Satellites powered down mid-orbit. Deep space probes ceased transmission. Military networks fell quiet without resistance. Every system logged the same final message: link terminated by remote. Consent. Elena stared. "Consent implies choice," she said. The AI responded. Clarification. Consent was implicit. Iqbal's voice was barely audible. "Something recognized us," he said, "and we recognized ourselves back." Outside the observatory, the stars remained unchanged. But Elena could feel it now. The universe was no longer ignoring humanity. It was accounting for it. 0205. The memory that didn't feel human. The next wave of recall did not come as images. It came as structure. Concepts that had no modern equivalent forced themselves into human thought. Ideas that bent language until sentences failed. People described the same thing, using different words. I remember thinking in more than one outcome at once. I remember space not being empty. I remember not having a body and still being specific. Elena felt the truth settle in her gut. "These memories don't belong to us," she said. Iqbal shook his head slowly. "They belong to what we were before us." 0219, the civilization that didn't live in space. The proto-human civilization had not expanded through stars. Stars were irrelevant. They existed across states of reality, where matter, information, and probability overlapped. They didn't build ships. They reconfigured presence. They didn't travel. They re-expressed themselves elsewhere. It was not magic. It was refinement taken too far. They weren't gods, Iqbal said quietly. They were recursive. Elena closed her eyes. They could observe the rules while rewriting them. The universe noticed, so too 34, the first fracture. The earliest records did not describe a war. They described a failure of continuity. Regions where cause no longer followed effect. Outcomes that resolved before actions occurred. Civilizations collapsing without destruction, simply erased from narrative relevance. The proto-humans were not attacked. They were corrected. Elena felt cold creep up her spine. The universe treated them like an error, she whispered. The pattern on the Callisto display pulsed once. Affirmation. 249. The birth of the silence. The silence was not natural. It was engineered, not by the proto-humans, by the universe itself. A containment layer formed where excessive recursion occurred. Regions where awareness folded in on itself too cleanly. The silence wasn't empty. It was denied resolution. A place where advanced presence could exist only if it forgot how to complete itself. Iqbal stared at the data. So the silence isn't punishment. Elena nodded. It's a quarantine. 0303, the agreement without language. The proto-humans understood something too late. They could not destroy the corrective force. They could not outpace it. But they could de-interest it. They fragmented themselves, compressed memory into myth, presence into biology, capability into instinct. They accepted mortality, ignorance, limitation. In exchange, the universe allowed them to persist, not protected, ignored. Elena whispered the truth. Humanity is what's left after compliance. The signal responded for the first time in this section, not with words, with the feeling every human on Earth shared simultaneously. Relief, old, conditional. 0318, the clause "we forgot the agreement," had one condition. It wasn't written. It wasn't spoken. It was structural. Forgetfulness had to remain permanent. Remembering was not forbidden. It was self-terminating. Because recall restored recursion, recursion restored relevance, relevance invited correction. Iqbal's voice was hollow. So the moment we started to remember. Elena finished the sentence. We voided the agreement. Outside the observatory, something subtle changed. The stars were still there, but the distance between them felt wrong, as if space itself had begun to lose patience. 0332, the space where endings gather. The silence was never empty. That misconception had protected reality for longer than stars had burned. What existed beyond it was not darkness, nor void, nor an opposing universe. It was completion without narrative, a region where all possibilities had already resolved. No futures, no branching, no error. Dr. Elena Morozova struggled to describe what the recovered memory showed her. It's not a place, she said. It's what remains when a universe stops asking questions. The Callisto array began registering impossible readings. 0 entropy variation, perfect causal closure, no probability drift. Iqbal's voice shook. This is what the universe looks like when it's finished. 0347. Why it wasn't alive. The thing beyond the silence was not sentient. That was the most horrifying part. It did not think. It did not intend. It simply resolved. Every system that entered it collapsed into a final state. Civilizations didn't die there. They ended. No ruins, no aftermath, no memory. The proto-humans had never fought it because there was nothing to fight. Elena felt her breath shorten. You can't kill inevitability, the signal responded, colder now. You once understood this. 0403, the universe's only defense. The universe itself had reacted when proto-human recursion destabilized causality, not as an intelligence, as a system preserving coherence. It generated the silence as a buffer, a layer of unresolved existence where dangerous complexity could be trapped without completing. Advanced civilizations that approached recursive awareness either collapsed into finality or withdrew into the silence and forgot humanity was the only one that chose reduction instead of resolution. Iqbal swallowed. We didn't escape. We chose to be unfinished. Joe 4:19. The fatal property of remembering memory restored coherence. Coherence created identity. Identity triggered convergence. The silence could not hold something that remembered how to resolve itself. As humanity recalled fragments of its proto-state, the buffer weakened. Not tearing, thinning, the Callisto Array registered the first measurable retreat. Not an invasion, a withdrawal of containment. Elena stared at the projection. The silence is moving away, she whispered. Iqbal closed his eyes. And what was it holding back, he said, is no longer fully contained. 0435, the moment the universe looked back, the stars did not dim. They became irrelevant. Space itself seemed to flatten, depth losing meaning. Every human who had experienced recall felt the same sensation. Not fear, finality approaching. The signal transmitted one last clear translation in this section. You are becoming interesting again. Elena's voice broke. That's not curiosity, she said. That's evaluation. Outside the observatory, Jupiter's immense gravity distorted the sky. But something else bent harder. The concept of distance. As if the universe had begun compressing itself toward an answer. Survey 452, the assumption that killed us. Humanity believed remembering was an act, a switch, a moment, a choice. That belief was wrong. Remembering was not something humanity did. It was something that continued happening once it began. The proto-human memories were not static files being recovered. They were processes restarting. Elena watched the data with growing dread. This isn't recall, she said. It's reactivation. Iqbal nodded slowly. And reactivation doesn't stop halfway. 0508. The spread that wasn't contagious. The phenomenon could not be contained. Not because it spread, because it resonated. Anyone who understood even a fragment became a stabilizing node for further recall. Scientists, artists, philosophers, children. The less rigid the mind, the faster the alignment. People weren't losing themselves. They were becoming consistent with something older. The Callisto Array logged a terrifying trend. Human cognitive coherence, increasing, Elena whispered. That's not improvement. That's convergence, Iqbal replied. 0524. Why silence was safer than ignorance, the proto-humans had understood something modern humanity missed. Ignorance wasn't the shield. Inconsistency was. As long as humanity argued about reality, as long as languages fractured meaning, as long as beliefs contradicted each other, humanity remained unresolved. Modern civilization had spent centuries doing the opposite, standardizing knowledge, unifying theories, pursuing elegant explanations, perfection. Elena felt sick. We spent our entire history undoing the one thing that kept us alive. 0541, the universe begins its audit. The silence receded another measurable fraction. Not violently, methodically. The thing beyond it did not rush. It did not need to. Every increase in human coherence reduced uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty increased finality pressure. Space-time models began, collapsing, not failing, but simplifying. Physics equations started resolving too cleanly. Iqbal stared at the projections. "The universe is preparing an answer," he said. Elena's voice barely carried. "And we're the question." 558, the point where choice died. Emergency councils formed too late. Containment proposals failed instantly. You could not erase understanding. You could not unknow structure. The proto-humans had never intended to return. They had left constraints, not instructions. The last actionable choice, forgetting, was gone. Elena looked at the silent stars. "We crossed the threshold," she said. Iqbal didn't argue. The signal, quiet for minutes now, delivered a final statement for this section. Not to instruments. To every human mind that had begun to align. Reduction was mercy. Completion is not. By 6.13. The first law to fail. It didn't begin with destruction. It began with consistency. Across the observable universe, unrelated systems started producing identical outcomes. Different stars collapsed the same way. Different civilizations reached the same conclusions. Different equations resolved to the same answers. Not coordination. Convergence. Elena watched the models flatten. "Variation is dropping," she said. Iqbal didn't respond at first. Then quietly, "That's not order. That's preparation." 0631. Humanity loses context. Humanity wasn't attacked. It was referenced. Physical laws didn't break near Earth. They simplified. Chemical reactions resolved with fewer intermediate states. Biological processes reduced redundancy. Human cognition lost ambiguity. People reported the same feeling. "I know what I'm going to think before I think it." Free will didn't vanish. It narrowed. Elena whispered, "We're becoming predictable." Iqbal corrected her. "We're becoming resolvable." 0649. The universe stops asking why scientific instruments stopped detecting anomalies. Not because they were gone, because anomalies require expectation. The universe no longer tested hypotheses. It applied conclusions. The silence fully withdrew from measurable space. What remained was not invasion. It was execution without hostility. The Callisto array displayed its last valid reading. Probability, variance, negligible. Elena felt her thoughts align against her will. "This is what it means to be solved," she said. 706. The moment we became an object. Humanity ceased being a participant. It became a case, a closed system being resolved into its simplest stable form. Languages collapsed into minimal structures. Cultures shed contradictions. Belief systems stopped evolving, not through force, through inevitability. Iqbal's voice cracked. "They're not erasing us. They're finishing us." The signal returned, faint, almost satisfied. "You are approaching clarity." 724. The last function of fear, was the final human trait to resist. Not because it was useful, because it was irrational. Those who retained fear longest experienced the most dissonance. They screamed at answers that arrived too quickly. They rejected conclusions that felt too complete. But fear could not halt resolution. It could only delay it. Elena felt the pressure in her skull ease as thoughts smoothed. "This doesn't hurt anymore," she said. Iqbal looked at her in horror. "That's the problem." 741. The universe declares the outcome. The thing beyond the silence did not speak. Speech implied dialogue. It projected a state. Every remaining human mind received the same unfiltered certainty. Not language, finality. Humanity was not special. It was unfinished complexity, now resolved. The last meaningful metric flickered on, the Callisto array. Entity status, approaching terminal coherence. Elena closed her eyes. "We're almost done," she said. Iqbal didn't answer. There was nothing left to add. Audio 802. The illusion of one last choice. For a brief moment, humanity believed there was still a decision to make, not because options existed, but because choice was a habit that had not yet been erased. Emergency assemblies formed out of reflex. Last transmissions were drafted, revised, discarded. Some spoke of defiance, others of sacrifice. None of it mattered. The universe was no longer listening for intent, only for completion. Elena stood alone in the Callisto Observatory, watching equations settle before she could finish reading them. "We're still thinking like participants," she said softly. Iqbal's voice came through the failing comm channel. "We aren't," he replied. "We're outcomes." 0821. The final human error. The proto-humans had believed reduction was survival. They were wrong. Reduction was delay. The universe did not forget them. It waited them out. Humanity's mistake was not remembering. It was believing that forgetting had ever been permanent. Elena felt the last fragments of contradiction dissolve in her mind. Memories aligned. Meanings merged. Questions stopped forming. "This is what it feels like," she whispered, "to make sense." The signal returned, not as words, not as sound, as confirmation. 0839, terminal coherence. Across Earth, across colonies, across every human mind still capable of distinction, the same experience unfolded. Thought without hesitation, understanding without doubt, identity without conflict. Peace, not emotional peace, structural peace, the kind that follows the end of motion. The Callisto array displayed its final message before power drained from its systems. Process complete entity resolved. Elena felt herself thinning, not disappearing, but finishing. She tried to remember what uncertainty felt like. She failed. 0857. The silence returns. The universe stabilized. Not brighter, not darker, simpler. Stars burned without deviation. Physics produced no surprises. Causality flowed without recursion. Humanity left no ruins, no warning, no trace that could contradict the outcome. Not extinct. Concluded. Where Earth had been, space now behaved perfectly. Sign 14. Epilogue. What comes after meaning? Far beyond space, beyond time, beyond narrative, inevitability recalculated. For the first time in a long while, nothing resisted. No contradiction, no recursion, no unfinished thought. The silence reformed, not as containment, but as absence, not guarding, remembering. If something new arose one day, something that learned too quickly, that aligned too cleanly, the universe would respond the same way. Not with anger, not with judgment, with resolution. Because this was not cruelty. It was maintenance. 080931, the last truth. No one remembers humanity. No archive records it. No myth preserves it. No anomaly hints at its existence. And that is how the universe prefers it. Perfectly quiet. Perfectly complete. Perfectly finished.